Ghosting. It's silent, it's sudden, and it leaves behind more questions than answers. In this video, we're breaking down the hidden psychology behind ghosting, why people do it, why it hurts so deeply, and most importantly, what it really means. If you've ever been left wondering in silence, this is where you'll finally find clarity. Ghosting. It's a word that's become part of our everyday vocabulary, yet its sting never seems to fade. At its core, ghosting is simple. It's when someone you've been communicating with suddenly cuts off all contact, without warning, without explanation, without closure. One day the replies stop, the phone goes silent, and the person who once occupied space in your life has vanished into digital thin air. On the surface, it may look like just another form of rejection, but ghosting is different. It's not a clear no, it's not an honest breakup, it's not even an awkward conversation where both sides leave with answers they may not like. Instead, it is silence, and silence has a way of echoing louder than words. What makes ghosting so brutal is the vacuum it creates. Humans are wired for patterns and explanations. When someone disappears without reason, it hijacks our need for closure. The mind begins to spin, asking endless questions. Did I do something wrong? Were they never interested at all? Was it something I said? Unlike a direct rejection, where at least the reason is clear, ghosting leaves us in a fog of uncertainty, searching for meaning where none has been given. This absence is not neutral. In psychology, absence can be as powerful as presence. When communication suddenly stops, the silence itself becomes a message that feels unfinished, ambiguous, and deeply personal. Instead of resolution, you're left with a void, and often that void is filled by self-blame. Compared to other forms of rejection, ghosting lingers. A breakup with words allows a person to begin grieving, processing, and eventually moving on. Ghosting, on the other hand, suspends the grieving process. You're left stuck in a state of maybe. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe this isn't really the end. And that endless maybe keeps the emotional wound open, preventing it from healing. There's also a social dimension to consider. We live in a hyper-connected world where ignoring someone requires deliberate effort. To be ghosted is to experience someone's active choice to withhold acknowledgement, to act as if you don't exist. That can cut deeper than a harsh word, because it undermines the basic human need to be recognized. The power of ghosting lies not in what is said, but in what is withheld. It transforms silence into a psychological weapon, leaving the other person to wrestle with shadows of doubt. And that's why it hurts so much. It's not just the loss of a person, but the loss of clarity, the loss of narrative, the loss of dignity that comes with being denied even the smallest explanation. Ghosting is more than a vanishing act. It is the silent exit, a rejection delivered not with words, but with absence. And in many ways, that absence speaks louder than anything that could have been said. To understand ghosting, we need to look beyond the surface and into the psychology of avoidance. At its root, ghosting is not just about ending communication. It's about escaping confrontation. For many, difficult conversations trigger anxiety. The thought of saying, "I'm not interested anymore," or "this isn't working for me," feels overwhelming. Rather than facing the discomfort head-on, the ghoster takes the path of least resistance, silence. Conflict avoidance is a deeply ingrained behavior. It develops in people who associate disagreement or rejection with danger, whether that danger is emotional, social, or even physical. Growing up in environments where confrontation led to punishment, shame, or chaos can create adults who will do almost anything to avoid uncomfortable exchanges. Ghosting then becomes a learned strategy. It spares the ghoster from the awkwardness of saying goodbye, but at the cost of leaving the other person stranded in uncertainty. This avoidance is often tied to fear. Fear of hurting someone else's feelings, fear of being seen as the bad guy, fear of conflict spiraling into drama. Ghosters convince themselves that silence is kinder, that disappearing quietly is better than delivering bad news directly. But in reality, it only transfers the discomfort from themselves to the other person. The ghoster escapes momentary anxiety, while the ghosted is left with lasting confusion. Psychologically, ghosting also represents a lack of emotional maturity. Mature communication requires the ability to tolerate discomfort and express truth with empathy. Immature communication, on the other hand, relies on escape routes. Ghosting is the emotional equivalent of closing a door and running away, hoping the problem will resolve itself in the other person's mind. But unresolved endings don't simply vanish. They leave scars. Another key factor is communication scar, or rather, the lack of it. Many ghosters never learned how to express boundaries, decline politely, or handle emotional vulnerability. In a world dominated by digital interaction, these skills are eroding even further. Text messages and apps make it easy to disconnect without accountability. With a single swipe or click, a person can erase another from their social orbit, no explanation required. For someone uncomfortable with conflict, that button becomes an irresistible escape hatch. What's crucial to understand is that ghosting rarely reflects the worth of the ghosted. Instead, it reveals the limitations of the ghoster. Their silence is not evidence that you were unlovable. It's evidence that they lacked the tools, the maturity, or the courage to handle the situation with honesty. Ghosting is, in many ways, the perfect case study of conflict avoidance. It's a behavior born from fear of confrontation, reinforced by modern technology, and sustained by emotional immaturity. For the ghoster, it feels like the easier choice. For the one left behind, it feels like a devastating silence. And that imbalance, between the ease of escape and the weight of abandonment, is what makes ghosting so psychologically damaging. Ghosting doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's deeply connected to the ways we attach, bond, and respond to intimacy. To understand why some people ghost and why others are so devastated by it, we need to explore attachment theory, the framework that describes how early relationships with caregivers shape the way we connect in adulthood. There are 3 primary attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant. Each one influences how we handle closeness, conflict, and rejection, and each one plays a unique role in the psychology of ghosting. People with a secure attachment style are the least likely to ghost. Secure individuals are generally comfortable with both intimacy and independence. They've learned that relationships can survive honest communication, so even when they need to end a connection, they're more likely to express it directly, perhaps awkwardly, but with a degree of respect and closure. Ghosting simply doesn't align with their emotional toolkit. The story changes with the avoidant attachment style. Avoidant individuals often struggle with intimacy itself. They value independence to the point where closeness feels suffocating. When emotional intensity rises, they retreat. Confrontation threatens their sense of control, and conversations about feelings or boundaries trigger discomfort. For them, ghosting becomes an escape hatch, a quick way to re-establish distance without enduring the vulnerability of explanation. This is why avoidant types are far more likely to ghost. Disappearing allows them to sidestep their fear of being overwhelmed, while preserving the illusion of control over the situation. On the other side of the spectrum are those with an anxious attachment style. These individuals crave closeness, validation, and reassurance. When they connect with someone, they invest deeply and often fear abandonment. Being ghosted hits them the hardest because it directly collides with their deepest anxieties. Silence is not just silence. It becomes evidence of rejection, proof that their fears were justified. Without closure, the anxious mind spirals, replaying every detail in search of what went wrong. Ghosting can therefore feel devastating, even traumatic, to someone with this attachment pattern. What makes ghosting particularly painful is this clash between avoidant and anxious dynamics. The avoidant person ghosts to escape discomfort. The anxious person interprets ghosting as catastrophic confirmation of their insecurities. One is fleeing. The other is left drowning in unanswered questions. And this mismatch creates a cycle of hurt that extends beyond the individual incident, reinforcing attachment wounds that may have existed for years. It's important to note that attachment styles are not destiny. They exist on a spectrum and can shift with self-awareness and healthy relationship experiences. But when ghosting occurs, it often shines a light on these underlying patterns. It reveals how people cope, or fail to cope, with intimacy, vulnerability, and conflict. Ultimately, ghosting is not just about disappearing. It's about the psychological patterns that drive someone to avoid, and the vulnerabilities that make others feel shattered when faced with silence. In this way, attachment theory offers more than an explanation. It offers a map of the hidden emotional forces shaping our most painful relationship experiences. Ghosting is not a new phenomenon. People have always walked away from relationships without explanation. But what makes ghosting so widespread today is the digital age. Social media and dating apps have reshaped how we connect, how we value others, and how easily we can disappear. With a few swipes, we now have access to an endless pool of potential partners. This abundance creates what psychologists call choice overload. When faced with too many options, we start to view people less as individuals and more as interchangeable possibilities. Instead of working through tension or giving closure, it feels easier to move on to the next profile. In this sense, modern technology has made relationships more disposable. Dating apps are designed to keep users swiping. Each new match delivers a small dopamine hit, rewarding the search for novelty over the investment in depth. As a result, many people treat connections as temporary experiments rather than lasting commitments. And when someone no longer feels intrigued, ghosting becomes the default exit strategy, quick, clean, and free of accountability. Social media amplifies this even further. In earlier generations, disappearing from someone's life required physical distance. Today, disappearance is digital: a blocked number, an ignored message, a vanished profile picture. Technology allows us to erase someone from our daily view with the tap of a button. But for the person left behind, that silence doesn't feel like nothing. It feels like rejection magnified. Every unanswered message, every seen notification, every absence in the feed is a reminder of disconnection. Silence in the digital age is louder than words. Technology also fuels the illusion of abundance. Because alternatives seem limitless, ghosting feels less like ending a bond and more like reallocating attention. This mindset strips relationships of their weight, reducing them to fleeting digital interactions. The person ghosted often feels discarded, not because they lacked value, but because the culture of disposability trained the ghoster to keep moving. Yet, while digital tools make ghosting easier, they also intensify its impact. In previous eras, silence might have been ambiguous. You didn't know if a letter was lost or if someone was truly gone. Today, technology removes that ambiguity. You can see when someone is online. You know your message was delivered. You watch their posts while they ignore yours. In this way, technology weaponizes silence, turning absence into a visible, undeniable choice. Ghosting in the digital age is more than a personal decision. It's a cultural pattern. It reflects how technology has shifted our values: convenience over communication, novelty over commitment, and silence over uncomfortable honesty. And so the screen becomes both a shield and a sword. For the ghoster, it shields them from confrontation. For the ghosted, it cuts deep, making the rejection not only personal, but painfully public. Ghosting has always existed, but in the digital world, it has become a symptom of a broader culture of disposability. When you've been ghosted, the first instinct is almost always self-blame. The mind races through conversations, messages, and moments, searching for what you might have done wrong. Was I too needy? Did I say something embarrassing? Was I not enough? This spiral is natural, but it misses the crucial truth. Ghosting says far more about the ghoster than it does about the person who was ghosted. At its core, ghosting is a reflection of the ghoster's limitations, not the ghosted's worth. Choosing silence over communication reveals something about their emotional maturity, their capacity for respect, and their readiness for real connection. When someone disappears instead of speaking honestly, it signals they lack either the courage or the skills to engage with vulnerability. Maturity in relationships is not measured by perfection, but by accountability. A mature partner doesn't always have the right words, but they try. They acknowledge feelings, they set boundaries, and they choose clarity over avoidance. Ghosting, by contrast, is the opposite. It's a refusal to take responsibility for one's own decisions. It spares the ghoster discomfort in the short term, while offloading all of the emotional burden onto the other person. In this way, ghosting is not just about avoidance, it's about respect, or the lack of it. To ghost someone is to imply that their time, emotions, and humanity are not worth even a single closing sentence. It reduces a living connection to a vanishing act. And while that act can sting deeply, it should also be recognized as a red flag. A person who ghosts is showing you, through their silence, that they are not prepared to handle the complexities of real connection. Reframing ghosting is essential for healing. Instead of asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" the better question is, what does their behavior say about them? Ghosting doesn't prove you are unworth of love. It proves that they were unwilling or unable to show up honestly. Their silence is not a verdict on your value. It's a statement about their readiness. Seen this way, ghosting can even be protective. It removes from your life someone who is not capable of giving respect or clarity before they can cause deeper harm. Yes, it hurts, but it also reveals a truth. This was not someone ready to build trust, intimacy, or accountability. In that sense, ghosting is less a rejection of you and more a confession of them. Ultimately, ghosting means one thing clearly. This person was not equipped to communicate with honesty or to invest with maturity. And while their silence may feel devastating, it also clears space for someone else. Someone who will not vanish, someone who will speak, someone who is ready. Ghosting may feel like a reflection of your flaws. In reality, it is a mirror held up to theirs. Being ghosted leaves behind a unique kind of emptiness. There are no final words to hold on to, no explanations to process, just silence. And in that silence, the mind often becomes its own worst enemy, filling the gaps with self-blame and doubt. But the path to healing begins with one simple truth. Closure doesn't always come from the other person. Sometimes it has to come from you. The first step in processing ghosting is acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean approving of what happened. It means acknowledging the reality that you may never get an explanation. Waiting endlessly for a message that may never arrive only deepens the wound. Acceptance allows you to stop looking outward for answers and start looking inward for peace. The next step is reconnecting with your self-worth. Ghosting often tricks us into believing we weren't valuable enough to deserve a goodbye. But as we explored earlier, ghosting reflects the ghoster's limitations, not your inadequacy. Remind yourself that you are not defined by another person's inability to communicate. Self-worth comes from recognizing your value independent of someone else's validation. Detachment is another powerful tool. Detachment doesn't mean becoming cold or unfeeling. It means loosening the grip of unanswered questions. Instead of replaying conversations or searching for hidden meanings in silence, you detach from the need to know. You stop chasing closure from the ghoster and instead create closure within yourself. This shift allows you to move forward without carrying the weight of someone else's immaturity. Healthy coping also involves redirecting your focus. Invest energy back into the things and people who nourish you. Rebuild your confidence through friendships, hobbies, work, and self-care. Surround yourself with environments where your presence is valued and your voice is heard. By actively choosing where you invest, you dilute the sting of the space left behind. Most importantly, understanding the psychology of ghosting can itself bring closure. When you see ghosting not as a personal failure, but as a behavioral pattern rooted in avoidance, fear, or immaturity, the silence becomes less mysterious. It no longer feels like an unsolvable riddle. It becomes something you can name and understand. And once it is understood, it loses much of its power to haunt you. Coping with ghosting doesn't mean erasing the pain. It means transforming it into perspective. You learn to see that being ghosted is not a reflection of your value, but of the ghoster's limitations. You realize that closure is not something that has to be handed to you. It's something you can create for yourself. Moving forward is about reclaiming your narrative. Ghosting may close one chapter abruptly, but you still hold the pen. You get to decide how the story continues, with resilience, self-respect, and a deeper understanding of both human behavior and your own strength. In the end, ghosting leaves a silence, but within that silence lies an opportunity to listen not to the absence of another, but to the voice within yourself. Ghosting may feel like a personal rejection, but as you've seen, it says more about them than it does about you. The silence is their choice, but healing, understanding, and moving forward is yours. If this video helped you see ghosting in a new light, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more insights into the psychology of relationships. And share this with someone who might need a reminder that they are not defined by someone else's silence. Thanks for watching, and remember, the way forward begins with clarity.